Hello there, welcome to another online lesson. Today we are going to be talking about how the Nazis used terror to control society. This was called the police state. So once he has consolidated his power as Chancellor and becomes Führer, he's now got to control the whole country. There are two ways in which this was done, mainly through terror, but also propaganda. So we're going to focus on this lesson. It's going to be the terror, the fear element. And then in another video, you'll be able to watch the propaganda, how Joseph Goebbels brainwashed the people into following along. So the question, really, the overarching theme is, how did the Nazis use terror and propaganda to control society? If you think about this as a section B, you could obviously have one interpretation that would say terror was the main reason, and another interpretation would be the opposite, saying that propaganda was. Really, really strong topic to get your head around as far as a two-sided argument, but also a very interesting topic, if not a little bit difficult to learn about. So let's get started straight into this in looking at the different parts of the terror regime. Hitler said the following: terror is the best political weapon, for nothing drives people more or harder than the fear of sudden death. Just think about for a sec what that means. What does he say in there? And do you agree? Do you think that people will do whatever they're told to do if there's a gun at your head or somebody you love's head or your family? Is he right in saying that the best way to get your political ideas out there is to make people scared? Nothing drives people harder than a fear of sudden death. That's the sort of principle, I guess, that the Nazi Party are adopting here. So this little question I always ask, and if you're watching this because you missed the lesson, or you're watching this in revision if you're getting close to your exams, you can still take a moment to ponder this question. Is it better to be loved or feared? This is an important sort of philosophy or a principle to think about in this topic. Do you get people to follow you and do what you say by being nice and kind? Or do then people maybe start taking advantage of that? Or if you're just totally a brutal leader who kills and lives in total, or you live in total fear, are you more likely going to do what the leader wants? Really interesting little thing to think about before we go into this topic. And we can think about regimes around the world, can't we, that essentially do use the idea of fear more than love to get what they want. Okay, so that's a little question to think about as we go through this lesson today. So how does he do it? How does he keep control? This little diagram now, you can put this into your Google Docs, your notes, wherever you're doing this. Just summarize, this is the sort of big picture of the police state, okay? So keeping control in Germany relies on the terror state. Secret police called the Gestapo, who we'll talk about in this lesson, they would spy on and arrest enemies of the state. The SS, the black shirts, they're responsible for running the concentration camps and then later the death camps. And everyone was scared of being arrested by the Gestapo and being put in a concentration camp. So that's the gist of how you make people go along with this, by being scared. You also need the propaganda element of it to get hearts and minds, or to brainwash, as some may say, and you do that through rallies, posters and propaganda. We'll look at that in another video, and if you're revising this for year 11, remember that this propaganda is different to the propaganda to get Hitler elected. He's now in power, so this propaganda can be hard-hitting, it can be anti-Semitic, it can be all of the things that a legitimate party trying to win votes couldn't say in an election. The Nazis control and censor the radio and the newspapers as well, and school children, so even schools are taken over and the textbooks are changed. Again, you'll be able to see that in the lesson on the Hitler Youth and young people. So get them young is another idea. Sort of make them grow up to be ardent Nazis and hating the world, or whatever it is that they were teaching them. Get them young, because the older generation, they're going to struggle, aren't they, to change how they view. Old people generally are set in their ways. That's the view of the Nazi Party. And then there's one tiny little bit that sort of fits into how he does this all together. The popularity of the party. Did he do the things that he said he was going to do? He ripped up the Treaty of Versailles. That's one of the main reasons why people voted for him in the first place. And he created jobs, or made it appear that he created jobs, and the propaganda went wild on that as well. So people voted for him, and they were sort of thinking, okay, well, that's bad, and I don't really like that. But he did do what he promised, and he did rip up the Treaty of Versailles. So perhaps that's why a lot of people just went along with it. It's a whole world of debate and discussion about whether people are guilty or innocent or bystanders or going along with it. Something that you may well do if you go on to read history at university and you take up the Nazi story there. it's massive, and obviously there's so many different nuances involved in this. This was a real intense period of history in Europe, in the world, and of course in Germany. So today, as we've said, we're going to look at the terror state. So any attempt to gain or uphold any different ideas will be ruthlessly dealt with as a symptom of illness. Today we might say mental health, which threatens the healthy state. Anything that goes against what the Nazis are teaching or preaching is going to be considered a danger, and you are likely to be arrested or removed for that. To discover the enemies of the state, watch them and make them harmless is the duty of a political police force. So this is going to be separate to the everyday police. This is going to be a secret police. In order to fulfill this duty, the political police must be free to use any means necessary. So this is where we're starting this story. Straight away, 1933, Hitler's been elected Chancellor, and this is what he's saying and what he's setting up. Now, alarm bells should be starting to ring really clear here to a German or the citizens of Germany that things have just got very different and very scary very quickly. Okay, how do you know who these people are? How do you know straight away what they will deem dangerous? This is where straight away the fear begins. And it's sort of set up into these mini categories. And we're going to talk about these separately in a minute. But you've got the SS, the SD, the Gestapo, and the police courts, all of which are going to work together to make sure this whole thing works perfectly, streamlined. And as we know from the rest of the story, getting towards World War II, it worked. Okay, so let's break this down now and think about where we're going. So the three main parts for this lesson are going to be looking at the SS, the black shirts, they're the death squads later on, led by Heinrich Himmler, the SD, the security services led by Heydrich. They're uniformed, so people sort of know who they are because they're in uniforms. And then the Gestapo, the secret police, again led by Heydrich, kind of work together with the SD, which we'll talk about in a minute. They're non-uniform, so people don't know who the Gestapo are. They are essentially the bigger force of the fear because you just didn't know who were in the Gestapo. You could be in the supermarket having a moan, and the Gestapo might be there listening. And that's kind of what this statement you can see in the yellow box is talking about. Hush, speak through a flower. It seemed a curious answer because I looked puzzled. It was amplified. Do not speak of the government or party members unless you're praising them. So speaking through a flower is essentially, those of you who are football fans, you'll see after the match or at halftime when they're going off, because cameras are everywhere these days, they kind of talk with their hand over their mouth. So no one can see what they're saying. And that is kind of what this means. Be careful what you say, who you're saying it to. And if you're going to speak, say it through a flower so no one can see what you're saying. But essentially, it's advising do not say anything bad about the Nazi party. And everything you do say it, make sure they're praising them. So hopefully you can see, before we even delve into this topic, it's really quite simple. Fear controls everything. So let's look at the first bit of it, the sort of most important part of the police state. And in your notes, you may want to separate this down into little paragraphs or bubbles or whatever you're doing. If you're doing a mind map, let's talk about the SS themselves. So this is a little sort of scenario that we'll look at first of all. So let's read through it and see if we can imagine the scene. So you are fortunate to have come here. This is a good camp. Here you will work and get fed. Of course, if you expect to eat, you will have to work for it. And as long as you work, you will get along fine. Now, it is prohibited to possess any silver, gold, money or jewellery. Therefore, if you turn it in now, you will not be punished. So what are you imagining is happening here? What's the scene in your mind when you read that? Where do you think this is happening? All right. Personally, it seems to me that this is an arrival at a camp, perhaps, and they're getting this like welcome message to hand over all of their valuables. And then as that was being said, someone moved in the ranks of new inmates or new arrivals. Felix, one of the SS, whipped out his gun and shot him on the spot. And then, without a pause, get back to this little speech. Now, when I finish speaking, I want you to turn in your valuables, such as gold, silver, diamonds, and currency. So that whole thing was sort of weirdly violent, horrendous, but the speaker was just really calm. So very quickly, every single person who has arrived at this camp and is having this meeting, they've just realized, don't move, don't speak, don't do anything, because of how easy and how violent that was. So this was generally a true story. After the war, George Topas recalled meeting for the first time the commandant of the camp. one of the camps. Okay, so we can see the violence. The people knew what was going to be happening. They knew what happened, or certainly rumors started to spread how violent it was and how bad it was. Anything that could make people scared is what happened. Okay, so this little folder, this brown folder you can see, kind of summarizes the main facts for the SS. You want to try and maybe put some of these into some flashcards. There's about 240,000 of them. They are the main police force, if you like, of Nazi Germany. They're in charge of all other police and security forces as well. Himmler believes that the SS did not need to follow the laws. We saw that at the start of this lesson, where essentially the regime said that they needed to be free from the law to be able to do their duty. And source A really does sum it up. Himmler is addressing the Committee for the Police Law in 1936, so 3 years into their reign. It does not matter in the least if our actions are against some clause in the law. In my work for the Führer and the nation, I do what my conscience and common sense tells me is right. And the scary bit there really is it's their common sense, what they deem common sense. It's their opinion of what they see as a danger to society. So obviously, if anybody is anything against the Nazis, then this is where we're heading with this. As we've said before, they're known as the black shirts due to the uniform, and they will go on to be the death squads. To be in the SS, you had to be specially chosen. You had to basically be an Aryan, fit, pure, everything that the Nazi regime was spouting out. The Aryan would be the SS. Children, as you'll see in the education lesson, and remember if you're watching this as revision in year 11, or as you're approaching your exams, the Napolas were set up for particularly violent students who showed an aptitude that maybe would make them good SS. They would go after the Napolas, and they would be Aryan, and they would probably be the ones that were funneled into the SS when they came of age. So a little sort of link there to the education and the young people. But this summary here is the SS in general. Just try to make sure you know that story really, so you can explain how they work and why they were so efficient. The police state then continues. So it was original, these black shirts were set up in the rebrand. So remember when they rebranded the party after Hitler got out of prison, and they were set up as private bodyguard, they had 240 men. So now they've got 240,000 men by 1933-ish, 34, 35. It's grown quite massively. During the 30s, it's got to this huge number of 250,000 people, and they are then put in place around the country in charge of all of the other security services, as we've just mentioned. And of course, they are the racially pure, perfect German manhood and married to racially pure wives. The elite, if you want to call it that. And there's another scenario, just to give you examples of how this thing works. Himmler said, we have about 1 case of homosexuality a month. They will be publicly degraded, expelled and handed over to the courts. They will be sent to a concentration camp and shot while attempting to escape. So it's a bit like a game. Maybe if you're reading that, you're imagining this Squid Game type thing, maybe where they're given the chance to run and then they're obviously murdered. Thereby, removing the homosexual, the healthy blood which we are cultivating for Germany will be kept pure. All right, and that goes some way to your understanding of the concentration camps and the death camps that we'll see later on, why lots of gay people were sent there. So overall, that's just a little sort of summary of the SS, the main overarching body, if you like, that runs the terror program in Germany. The little aside to that is the SD. All right, so the SD is essentially an office where you might go to grass on somebody or report something, who they will then tell the Gestapo. And obviously, as we'll see in a minute, and if you're watching this again as revision, you'll know the Gestapo was sort of unknown. No one knew who they were. Well, the SD will have been. They will have known. So the SD, how I always talk about this and try and get you to understand this is, if you're like a photographer, remember you've got a device, cameras or something that have an SD card. Basically, the SD card holds all your photographs, all your videos, all the information that you want to save. So I always think of the SD as this, a place that holds information, all right, data. All of the people who've been reported are in the SD, like a sort of log of every single person, every person who's been grassed on, every person who's a suspect. They're all held in these records of the SD. It's their job to check any opposition, to watch what they're doing, and, as I say, keep these records. So they're set up to monitor, to spy, to watch. They are in uniform. You can see here that leader Heydrich. And they keep this index card of all of these people who they are interested in, worried about, or see as a threat. So that works directly under Himmler, and also works directly with the Gestapo. So a little summary here about how the terror state works. Okay, everybody knew somebody who knew someone who'd been in a camp. This was by design. So everybody knew of someone in the village or the town who'd been to the camp. And we'll talk about why that is in a minute. But it was important that everybody knew somebody. And even if the stories weren't true, they leaked or got sent back or got brought back from the camps, the stories were magnitude made worse so that you did not want to go either. Everything that happened, how bad it was in the camp. There was a little joke, well, there's lots of jokes going around, but this is one that a lot of Germans sort of said at the time. A man goes into the dentist says, open wide. The man sits up and says, not in front of a stranger. And all that really means is, it's hardly like lol, is it? We're not laughing our heads off of that. But what it really means is, don't open your mouth. All right? Don't open your mouth in front of anybody, especially strangers. As we've talked about earlier, this speak through a flower thing was about trying to hide that too. By 1945, through the whole Nazi regime, about 800,000 Germans were imprisoned. So from the very beginning, so when Hitler took over in 1933 to the end of World War II, to the end of the Nazi Party, they were imprisoned nearly 1 million as enemies of the state. 500,000 of them had been executed by being shot in the neck. All right, so pretty grim way to die. So that's how it works. You build up the fear, you make everybody talk about the fear, you make sure everybody knows somebody who has been involved in the camps or something like that, or maybe an interrogation from the Gestapo. Speaking of the Gestapo, let's make this our third little summary that you will have in your notes. Okay, these are the secret police. They come with so much fear because nobody knows who they are. And when you do realize the Gestapo have been around, again, this adds to the feeling of the fear. All right, so again, our little fact file here, led by Heydrich, about 30,000 of them by 1944, which isn't a huge amount, which you'll see in a minute why that's important. Basically, they rely on everybody else to do the work for them because there's not enough of them. They spy on people, they tap up phones and they listen into what people are saying. They can ransack your home and search your home without any sort of permission. Obviously, before this period, and no one could come in your home without a warrant. Well, the Nazi Party have got rid of that as well. Now, you may recognize some of these things from regimes around the world at the moment. This is one way in which they are able to strike fear throughout the nation, isn't it? Arresting people, sending people to camps or sending people away without any trial or anything. It's all very similar to how these ruthless, shall we say, regimes around the world are working today. In 1939, about 160,000 people were arrested by the Gestapo. So it is a fairly efficient system of getting people, the enemies of the state, off the streets. But make sure you sort of getting your head around these little facts. These are great facts to get into your answer. Nice facts. And even if you don't necessarily remember everyone exactly, if you say hundreds of thousands were arrested by such and things like that, you're going to be rewarded for that because you're showing that you understand the numbers involved and how there was some efficiency in this. They have no uniforms, as we know. They are secret, so you couldn't be sure. You couldn't be sure where they are in a supermarket, in a football match. If you're saying something and you think you're saying it to your friend, well, your friend A might grass on you because they're scared not to. But you also don't know if someone next to you is in the Gestapo. This is what makes people really, really scared. When they come and knock for you, they will usually do it at midnight or in the middle of the night when you're least aware and probably easier to maybe control. They will use torture, all sorts of different ways of using torture to get you to confess. And of course, as we know from history, anyone who's being tortured will generally confess just to stop the pain. It's never a good way of doing things, but the Gestapo did it really well. Source C gives us a little idea to think about what was going on here. The deputy chief, he says, any attempt to uphold different ideals will be ruthlessly dealt with, and the symptoms of the illness which threatens the healthy unity of the state. Now, we talk about that exactly at the start of this lesson, but thinking about now we've got some context of the different parts of the police state and the Gestapo, you now see that they are just doing basically what they were told to do and allowed to do. So in summary, the Gestapo is a unified police force and security force working with the SD. So the SD will get the suspect or the people that they are worried about. They will pass that on to the Gestapo. The Gestapo will then go and visit you. Basically, that's how it works. All of it is designed to create this network. So that's the Gestapo, and I suppose we could think about if this was going to be a Section B, and I don't mean Section B where they're saying terror was more important or was one view of how they control society and in propaganda. We could just get a Section B on the different types of terror. One interpretation says the Gestapo was the most efficient or successful. One that says the SS were, or as you'll see in a minute, we'll do the courts and the camps. One may say that. So really keeping our head always in every topic thinking, how could this be a Section B? How could this be one view or another? What it's more likely to be is a 12 marker. Explain why the Nazis were able to use terror to control society. Paragraph 1, the SS. Paragraph 2, the SD. Paragraph 3, the Gestapo. Or, as we'll see in a minute, you do a paragraph on the concentration camps or the law courts. A really, really good 12 marker because it's one that you'll be interested in, because it's really, well, it's bad, it's horrible, and I think sometimes the worst of it is what we remember, isn't it? Because it really gets us thinking. So that maybe think about this more of a 12 marker than a Section B, but still always think about that Section B in our script as well. So that's the Gestapo in a nutshell, really. So the main weapon, as we've said, is fear. It has to be fear. Because you can't tell who they are or who they are, it is fear. And it's mostly fear because you don't know who they are. They can just come and take you whenever they want. They've been given sort of permission from the government to do that. Most people die in their custody from the torture or the beatings, or they were sent to a camp where a lot of people died there as well. Now, this is the key bit of the Gestapo that you would need to be saying, particularly in a 12 marker, when you're saying how the Gestapo helped control society, was that it was so feared, people shut up. People just didn't say a word. They just got on with their lives, head down, because they were scared of being caught. 30,000 people compared to 8 million police officers. You can see the size of the thing is tiny. It relies on normal people grassing and snitching. All right, so this is a key bit. And if you are worried about your neighbour snitching on you, even family members, remember these children, they are being brainwashed in school. They would quite happily be grassing on family members. If you had a fight at dinner time, or you've had an argument or a disagreement, there's a high likelihood that the children would either go into school and say, and the school would then call the Gestapo, or you yourself might go and grass on your own family. And it was this fear. It was just fear. And if anything ever came out where you knew something and you didn't tell the Gestapo, then of course you're next as well. All of it was done so well to make sure this thing worked wonderfully. And this, alongside the propaganda in another online lesson, perfect. Just this is how they did it. This is how they got normal people, decent people, to go along with it or to even get involved in it. All right, so fear. Just remember, that's your gist of it all. The Gestapo spies on you. You're woken up in the middle of the night, as we've said. 5 minutes, pack your bags, taken to a cell at the police station, interrogated, interviewed, whatever, tortured until you say something. Then you sign this form, this D11 form, which gives them consent to put you in a camp. You go to the camp, hand it over to the SS. We saw the scenario earlier in the lesson, didn't we? When you arrive, get rid of all your personal belongings. You're there for 6 months. It's horrible, hard, physical labour. You then go home and you tell everybody how bad it was. And the cycle continues. So you go home, you tell everyone down the pub, you tell your friends, you tell your family that it was horrendous. Also in the camps, you would send postcards home whilst you're there, saying how bad it is. The Nazis relied on you as the sort of person in the camp, as the victim, if you like. You are the one who is going to whip up the fear by telling everybody how bad it is. And of course, before your postcard is sent, it's read by a camp commander. So all of it, hopefully you can see, is just really well thought out. And maybe, arguably, this is where it was all planned. In those early days after the Munich Putsch, perhaps this is where Hitler planned it all perfectly in Munich, in the Mein Kampf, in the prisons. But it just really is a stunningly well thought out and well planned thing. Just so brutal, so horrendous, and so horrific. So the police state then, this little example, we just mentioned a little while ago, not being able to even trust your neighbours. And this is a true story, a real story. Ilsa Sonia Totska, she was a resident next door to us. I noticed her because she is of Jewish appearance. The person saying this is the old lady in the picture next to the yellow box. She said, I should like to mention that Miss Totska never responds to the German greeting, Hail Hitler. I gathered from what she is saying that her attitude was anti-German. So this woman, we can see here, she was about 21 at the time, just didn't like the look of her neighbour, said she wasn't of a particularly good Nazi, she wasn't hailing Hitler, I don't know how often they spoke, and she said she was of Jewish appearance. So to this neighbour, this 21-year-old, this Ilsa Soniatowska just looked Jewish. So she grassed on her to the authorities. Now, it's easy to be really angry at this woman. Her name is Resi Kraus. It's really easy to be angry at her, but then considering everything we've talked about so far in this lesson, she might have been scared not to, or she might have just been generally all for this, getting rid of Jews and things like that. She might have genuinely believed it. She then goes on to say, on the contrary, she always favoured France and the Jews. Among other things, she told me that the German army was not as well equipped as the French. I mean, come on. What a thing to say. It might have been a passing conversation in the local supermarket. She might have just said, blah, 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 or the French army was this, that, or the other. So Resi Kraus here, she took offence to that, and she's went and grassed. Denounced is the proper word, sorry. We should use the word denounced, not grassed. Now, and then a woman of about 36 years old comes, and she is of Jewish appearance too. So you can imagine this 21-year-old looking out the window, sort of spying a little bit on what Ilsa's doing, and she says this woman comes along. I think she's probably implying there that she might be a lesbian. To my mind, Miss Totska is behaving suspiciously. I thought she might be engaged in some kind of activity which is harmful to the German Reich. So this story is as real as it gets, taking away all the sort of characters and the famous names of the Nazi Party. This is where we get real. This is the bit that you should be sat there watching this thinking, wow, that they managed to get just a 21-year-old who just didn't like the look of her neighbour to make up all sorts of stuff, send her to the camps, and we can answer those questions that you can see on the photo of Resi Kraus. Who wrote it? What is it saying? Why do you think she wrote this? And why did she denounce Ilsa? For no reason other than she didn't like the look of her and she was acting suspicious. Now, you imagine this magnified all around the country, not just in one part of Germany. Then you can see how this terror and police state really, really worked in real life. So Ilsa Soniatowska, of course, was arrested, and she ends up in Ravensbrück concentration camp for women and children, all thanks to that 21-year-old neighbour who just didn't like the look of her. These photographs give you a bit of an idea about what's coming. You know this already, whether you're watching this the first time because you missed a lesson from Key Stage 3, but also Year 11 as you're preparing for your exams. We know about the camps and what happened there, don't we? All right, so I just thought it'd be interesting and important to talk about this real life story to make it more everyday and make you understand how this thing worked. Okay, so let's have a little practice with our interpretation skills. So pause the video and answer that question there with our script. The view of interpretation 1 about the success of the Gestapo is, I can tell this because it says. Have a little read of it. When you're done, unpause and I'll give you a little model answer. Right, so mine is, the view of interpretation 1 about the success of the Gestapo is that it wasn't very efficient and relied on normal people. I can tell this because it says around 80% was discovered by ordinary citizens who turned information over. Job done, 2 marks, off we go. You then flip it round, remember, for the second 2 marks, whereas, and then the other interpretation 2 will be something different. I would imagine in this kind of topic, it would be something suggesting that the Gestapo was very efficient, very successful, worked all by itself, worked or super well with the SD, which is sort of opposite to this one, which is saying it relied on normal people. Okay, remember, it's not always going to be success or failure or positive or negative. It will be one thing or other. And in this case, I think it's one thing or other. So I might say that this is what it is. You could also say the very last sentence. Most of this unpaid cooperation came from normal people who were not members of the party, but equally it's the same point as the quote that I've picked out there. So hopefully this is getting really easy for you now. This particular question 3b, what is the view of these two interpretations? Remembering that 3c is another 4 marker, is why are they different? Because they're based on different sources. That if you've done a whole section B, then 3A is the 2 source questions, and they will match up to the interpretations. There are plenty of these practice section Bs on our website in all of the videos. There's a little note in the Germany section of the website that says this one has got some exam practice at the end, but there's plenty, and by the time you're getting ready for your exams, you should be utterly ready for section B. Okay, let's move on now to the next way that they did it, the concentration camps. Little important caveat to note here at this point. The concentration camps were political camps where they put prisoners. These are not the death camps that we talk about with Auschwitz. Okay, so Auschwitz was in 1942, was set up during World War II. For Edexcel, remember, our course only goes up to 1939. So make sure you are not describing camps as the death camps. These camps are the ones that are horrible, hard labour, and of course people will die at these camps, but these are the ones where you're sending messages home and going home to tell everyone how bad it is. So they're set up to manage these people under protective arrest, basically enemies of the state, people that governments are worried about or have been informed on, and the Gestapo have picked up about 150,000 of them at first. They're ran and managed by the SS, and there's a little job in there for those that are remaining from the SA. Remember we said during the Night of Long Knives, a few of the SA carried on, but it was never ever again the size that it was under Rom before the Night of the Long Knives. So these are these aggressive, thuggy people, remember. Now, Dachau is the first camp that was set up in 1933. Exactly when Hitler first comes to power, they wasted no time in setting up these political prisons, camps for prisoners. They're located away from the cities and the public gaze because obviously what goes on in there, we don't want people sort of being freedom fighters or trying to, help. Although you might think, well, that's a contradiction because surely they would want everyone to see how bad it is. I feel like these things are definitely best away from cities, out in the countryside. So these are who you would be expected to talk about if we are mentioning the enemies of the state. The enemies of the state are the people under protective arrest. These are the people who the Gestapo and the SD will be watching and monitoring. Communists, obviously. Social Democrats, so political parties or people who were in the political parties before the Nazis ended them after the Enabling Act. Jews, obviously. Trade unionists, so people who are fighting for the rights of the worker. The work shy, so people who we might say in our country are on benefits or who don't work and they probably should work, they would become enemies of the state as well. The undesirables, so the homosexuals, obviously. Gypsies would be arrested. Germans who bought from Jewish shops, they would be arrested as well. Pacifists, so that's people who are after a bit of peace. They're angry with the violence and they're sort of trying to end it all. The radical Christian organizations, they would be arrested too because they're a danger, and there is a lesson on the website as well for the new Nazi religion. So obviously Hitler is going to create his own religion as well. That's important that you understand that one. That's quite a difficult topic because it's not really interesting. It's not something you can relate to or get behind like this topic. So maybe work a little bit harder on that Christian Nazi church lesson. Watch that several times. But they would anyway be arrested as well. Anyone who criticised Hitler or the Nazi Party and any intellectuals, essentially this goes for any dictator ever really. Clever people are a danger because knowledge is power, I guess, and they can somehow compete or go against the party. And of course, more undesirables in society, people like prostitutes. So we've got a whole range of people here who would be classed as enemies of the state. So when you say in a 12 marker, one reason why they were able to control society was through the concentration camps. And you might start by saying, firstly, enemies of the state were arrested and sent, for example, communists, Jews, whatever. And you don't have to remember all of them. A couple of them will do, but the obvious one will always be Jews. You might remember gypsies, you might remember prostitutes. I don't know, whatever it is, there's some examples of some of these enemies of the state. Now, this guy, I don't even know how to say his name, Karl von Ossietzky. He was a journalist, just like we have journalists in every country today. He spoke out against the Nazis, basically, and was sent to a camp. You can see the little bit in the blue box there. He was arrested in 1933 straight away and sent to one of the concentration camps. When the Red Cross visited him in 1935, so he'd been there for 2 years, they saw a trembling, pale creature, one eye swollen, teeth knocked out, dragging a broken, badly healed leg. That sounds awful, doesn't it? This is what this guy's living with. And then in 1938, while still in prison, he died at the age of 48 of tuberculosis and God knows what else. So let's just take a minute to think about this really here. This is what's happening in real life. This is a journalist, someone who spoke out against the party and found himself in the last 5 years or so of his life in utter pain, in utter agony. And all of this was legal, or all of this was allowed because we're now in this dictatorship. How we got here, well, we know the story, but probably people must be thinking never in a million years would they have expected this kind of thing to happen. All right, so that's again just bringing us a real life story into this topic. And then this is just a page out of a newspaper, just to give you an idea again of the real life part of this. Enemies of the state, a list would be published in the paper. You might recognize your family names in there. You might not want to ever hang out with them if it's your friends. You think, oh God, people are watching them. If you hang around with them, then you might be next. So it's basically just a list of German women who were seen purchasing goods from Jewish shops. That's what this one is. And every week in the Nazi newspaper Der Stürmer, they print something else. These are just printed to scare, terrorize, and make people not buy from Jewish shops. And as we know from the Nuremberg laws in 1935, they were boycotted anyway. So that's why it was illegal, because the regime told you couldn't shop in Jewish shops. Sorry, so you would end up on a list if you were seen. Obviously, someone's watching all the time. All right, so this is a nice little bit of facts for us for this story. By 1933, there were only 3 crimes when Hitler became Chancellor that carried the death penalty. In 1943, 10 years later, so halfway through World War II, there are 46 crimes that Hitler has created that now carry the death penalty. Maybe pause the video and have a little think what these might be. All right, and then unpause it, come back, and we'll add these to your notes. So breaking into the house of a soldier during the war, that's going to be the death penalty. That's an obvious one because they're saying the soldiers are heroes out there fighting. Having a sexual relationship with a Jew. Now we know again from the Nuremberg laws it was illegal to have a relationship with a Jew, so that would carry the death penalty. Telling an anti-Nazi joke. Now come on, this is ridiculous. But we know in certain regimes around the world this is exactly how it is. So it's no different, it's no surprise. Again, it was trying to make people not do it. Stealing towels, a sheet and a pillow from an air raid depot. So basically what they're saying is you're robbing from the state in a time of war, which is just terrible. A mugging committed by someone who had a criminal record and came from a family of criminals. So if there is a record in your family and you've mugged or done some other crime, because you've got a record or because someone in your family has, they'll just class you all as bad people and you'd be killed for it. So they're just a few little examples. Now, in order to be killed for this, you would have to go to court. That's the sort of, I guess you could say, the normal bit of a system, a legal system. So that will be our last topic of this lesson. Added all together in the terror story is the police state, the courts, the legal system and the courts. Everything has to be done legally. And we say legally, a little bit. Well, you'll see after this bit how when we say legal, probably not quite legally in a good way. So Hitler knows that all these charges that you're going to bring up against people are rubbish. In a real court, in a court before the Nazis took over, there'd be no way the judge would take it seriously. So this is why he takes control of the courts and the judges. Okay, so to be a judge in Nazi Germany, you had to be a Nazi. You had to join the National Socialist League for the Maintenance of the Law. And any judge who maybe displeased Hitler, they would have their membership taken off them and probably sent to a camp themselves. So it was in the interest of you as a judge to give Hitler the exact answer that he was looking for all of these people who would go through the courts. They were told by the Nazis, by the party, that the interests of the Nazi party were more important than the law. Now remember, Germany is a civilized country. It has laws, long established laws, hundreds of years of laws. The Nazi party have basically said, ignore them, make sure the verdict that you give is one that's going to please the Nazi party, whether it goes against the law or not. And we see this kind of thing as well in some of the regimes around the world currently. It's just a really easy way, I suppose, for the leaders to pass laws or to get judgments that they need. Okay, now as well as that, the judges decided if you were innocent or guilty. So they ended trial by jury, which is generally a human right in most civilized countries, that the jury will decide if you are guilty or not. Now the judge will, and the judge will also decide on the punishment as well. The new People's Court, now we know about the People's Radio. Obviously, it makes sense to call it the People's Court. Just the semantics of that it belongs to us, it's for the people. This is set up to hear all these cases of treason that are brought to them by the Gestapo and things like that. These judges are handpicked. Trials are in secret. There's no right to appeal. And then between 34 and 39, about 534 people have been sentenced to death for political offences. All right, a rise from just 8 between 30 and 32. So you can see that the Nazis are using the legal system and the courts to get rid of enemies. not quite as violent as the Night of the Long Knives, where they just killed them in their houses or in the streets. This is all done through the system, through the courts, and there's no way that you can appeal. This is where it sort of gets really dodgy. Not only are people in Germany grassing on you, your neighbours, your friends, your family, but then you get spied on and then you get brought to the court. And you pretty much know that if you come to the court, game over. Now, just to finish this topic off, Source G gives us a really interesting insight into how this thing worked. In this case, Hitler himself decided the punishment for this guy. So Luftgas was 74 years old. He's been convicted of hoarding eggs soon after the Second World War started. So this guy, this 74-year-old, hoarded some eggs, didn't give it to the government or I guess whatever. And the Fuhrer picked this one up. He saw the press cutting of this story and he sentenced this guy to 2.5 years in prison. And then he decided, didn't want him in prison, he wanted him executed and make the arrangements. So this is what's happened here, is even Hitler sometimes got involved in these court cases. And this is an extreme, this is a horrific example. If all of the rest of the examples we've talked about in this lesson haven't been, this is awful as well, isn't it? Hitler decided to execute a 74-year-old because he kept some eggs. Obviously, that story will get around, maybe even made worse, Chinese whispers, whatever. That's the kind of way that you get fear. So one of the more famous court cases that you might want to go and look at, there are plenty of films about it, and it's all over the internet as well, as a really common example of the Nazi law courts, was the case of Hans and Sophie Scholl. They're a brother and sister, and they had other people involved who went into a university and they sort of released pamphlets, anti-Nazi pamphlets, criticizing the party. They were arrested and killed because of this, all right? But it was a really very public case, but it did show that people were willing to oppose the Nazis, though, doesn't it? It's a good example of that there was opposition to the regime despite all this terror and fear. And I think Hans and Sophie Scholl and the other people involved in this case who were executed because of this probably deserve a little bit of a moment of gratitude, really, or recognition of their bravery to go against this. So all of that said, this is the end of the terror story. Remember, we're looking at this in two parts. So the other lesson that follows this will be, how do they use propaganda to brainwash everybody? It is definitely both of them an important bit. Just which one's more important? It might be really useful at the end of this one if you just write a 12 marker. And if you've got your Operation 9 to 5 booklet, there is a question in there for you to do this. Explain why the Nazis were able to use terror or the police state to control society, 1933 to 39. You can pick any three: courts, camps, Gestapo, SS, whatever you want. Get that handed in, get that mark. This would be an ideal one to practice a 12 marker because it's a good topic. There's plenty for you to say, and you just get to practice that technique. All right. So as always, thank you very much for watching this. Hope it was useful and helpful. If there are any parts to it that you weren't sure about, ask your teacher and we'll sort that out. Okay. So once again, thank you, and we'll see you on the next video.